Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the reports that Reform UK's policies would trigger a run on the pound. In fact, the term quoted was immediate and violent sterling crisis. Now, anyone who is paying attention knows this, because Farage not only thought Liz Truss's economic policies were brilliant, but wants to go way further. And we saw what happened when Truss was allowed in charge. In fact, Farage has enthusiastically supported both Truss and Trump's economic policies, and both have triggered crises in their own money markets. So the question is less about what would happen if Farage implemented his policies. We know what would happen. It's about what he really intends to do. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So the Daily Telegraph, this isn't in like the Woke Guardian or anything, this is the Daily Telegraph, quoting a senior investment banker, whom, by the way, Richard Tice calls immature. I was like, I mean, you can say what you like about bankers, but I don't think immature really covers it. But anyway, they're quoting a senior investment banker as saying that Farage's plans would immediately blow an £80 billion hole in the country's finances. This is essentially like double, I think a bit more than double the damage that Truss did. The most immediate consequence would be, of course, that investors in the gilt market would lose faith that the government would be able to service its debt, and you would trigger a run on the pound, where the pound devalues very rapidly as lots of people sell bonds in sterling. Remember that this was only narrowly averted by the Bank of England after Liz Truss's monkey business, and Farage is proposing way greater levels of insanity. It would mean the pound would overnight be worth much less. Given that we are reliant on imports for essentials such as food, medicines, and even Farage's precious fossil fuels, the cost of basics would skyrocket. You would possibly even be looking at hyperinflation. We saw how what Truss did caused her to lose office within a matter of weeks. She's now the shortest serving Prime Minister ever by some margin. Trump's economic policies were different, but they still had the same predictable result of seeing him climb down on the extent of his policies in order to calm the markets down. In Trump's case, his actions damaged both the stock and bond markets. But without the credible way to remove a president, Trump remained in office, but he was still forced to remedy the situation. So there's a sense in which you might imagine that Farage doesn't really mean it. He's lying to win votes, and if he did win power, he would just proceed to run the economy in basically the same way the Conservative Party would. He would immediately say, oh yeah, these promised tax cuts for the poor, when the economic conditions are right, while he goes ahead with whatever tax cuts for the rich he thinks he can get away with. However, we can't be absolutely certain about that. Remember that when Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader, he and John McDonnell were planning to do exactly the same thing. McDonnell even admitted to planning for a run on the pound for when they won the election. They were serious about going ahead with their economic plans, despite the catastrophic impact it would have on the currency. They knew what it was going to do, and they said, we're going to do it anyway. So would Farage do the same? He actually might. Think about what Farage really wants to achieve in politics. Now, I've observed him for some time. I'm genuinely not sure. We know he's a shill for big money and for Russia. Like Trump, he is also keen on feathering his own nest. Unlike Trump, Farage is not entirely transactional. He does have firm political beliefs as well. He doesn't just use xenophobia and racism as a tool for populist support. He's a committed believer and has been since his school days when, as a matter of public record, he mimicked the Nazis and even sang Hitler youth songs. And this was over 40 years ago, when the Second World War was still in most people's lived memories. The fact that he cannot bring himself to attack Putin, even though the Russian president is pretty much the least popular person in the UK, shows that Farage can't bring himself to change on some positions, even for political gain. In Kent, there's a row blowing up because the new Reform Council are refusing to allow the Ukrainian flag to fly. Now, if there's a foreign flag that even Reform UK, you would think, would allow to fly, it be the Ukrainian flag. No. Which actually, if you think about it, does at least make them consistent with their flag policy. But it does also show that even when it costs them politically, they're going to stick to certain positions. It also speaks of how strongly he supports Putin. After all, Farage has happily flipped from being dead against nationalising British steel, which absolutely fits with his politics, to fully in favour, which does not at all. But he still can't attack Putin. And this isn't a tangential issue. That's relevant to this issue of economic policies, because when trying to work out whether a politician, any politician, if given power, would actually implement what experts believe is a crazy policy, you have to consider the following factors. First, does the politician in question believe the experts? Neither Liz Truss nor Donald Trump did, so they had to learn the hard way. Now, I can't know for certain. I suspect Farage does understand the impact his policies would have in this case. Second, is the politician personally harmed by negative consequences? Now, that's more difficult. The easy way to judge that is, do they believe they can win power? For example, a party that does not believe it can win power can promise whatever it likes. It knows it will never be put to the test. Now, that would have been true of Nigel Farage until very recently. But does he believe he can win power at the next election? In which case, he has to believe he'd be able to implement this. Then you'd have to think, so can he ride out the negative consequences? So what would be the impact of a pound in free fall? Well, it'd be very good news for Putin if he's still kicking about when it happens. Or Putin's successor if it comes to it. See, Farage's support for Putin, I don't think is personally about Putin. I think it's just support for an authoritarian dictatorship who is ideologically opposed to the EU, which Farage absolutely hates. So that could easily apply to the next Russian president as well, if they are also anti-democracy and anti-Europe. Farage may not mind huge economic damage to the UK. Then, of course, we have the possibility of playing the markets. Now, Nigel Farage was accused of being a very naughty boy in 2016. He was accused of declaring defeat in the EU referendum of 2016 before he could possibly have known the results. Now, that's not an accusation, that is actually fact. The accusation is it was in order to artificially increase the value of the pound, because the pound rallied at the news, because everyone knew it'd be economically bad to leave the EU, only for it to inevitably fall when the real result came out. A lot of people close to Farage seem to make an awful lot of money shorting the pound. Look up The Big Short if you want to know more. We saw something similar from Trump, who urged people to buy certain stocks just before he announced a pause on restrictive Liberation Day tariffs last month. He even boasted about some of the people who took advantage and made an absolute fortune. Well, Farage would like to make a fortune. He might be in legal trouble if he personally profits, but might be difficult to stop him secretly letting some investors know that he's about to announce something that will tank the pound and then rally it at a predetermined time a day or two later. Or the other way around, doesn't really matter. You know, a government announcement, like major government announcements, can affect the value of the pound. And an unworthy government that is going to tip people the nod when they're going to announce certain things can make a lot of money. There are people who can make hundreds of millions of pounds in a day with that sort of information, and then they can give Farage his cut surreptitiously after he leaves office. So if Farage either is committed as a Russian agent or just wants to make an easy king's ransom, I can absolutely see him crashing the economy. The third factor would be the reaction from his MPs. Now, the reason Truss was ousted was not because of the economic damage, but because of the polling damage. Her own MPs booted her out. Would Reform MPs do the same to Farage? Well, they can't get rid of him as party leader, so it'd be way more difficult than getting rid of Liz Truss. They can't just tap him on the shoulder. They would have to organise a parliamentary vote of no confidence. That is way higher stakes. But would they do it? Well, they'd be less likely to. After all, would they believe a different leader could win the next election? Might they not give Farage more time to turn any negative polling around, believing his lies about the tax cuts boosting growth or something, which means Farage would be free to carry on committing epic levels of carnage for his own profit or the profit of foreign enemies who have long supported him financially and politically. And even if they did boot Farage out, I mean, if he makes his first play a big one, he could still make so much money for his co-conspirators that his cut would be enormous. And if Farage is mostly in it for the money, he may not even mind being booted out of politics more quickly so that he can enjoy his ill-gotten gains sooner. You know, because once he no longer is in Parliament, he will no longer have to declare his income publicly and can safely accept the golden cheques. So although it's entirely possible that Farage would renege on a lot of campaign promises, indeed some of them are physically impossible, but he may renege even on the ones which are possible but incredibly foolhardy. But we also have to take seriously the idea he could use these policies to make himself and his friends incredibly wealthy, as well as cause a lot of damage to the country if that's what he wants as well. It's certainly what a lot of his international colleagues want. And all at our expense. Do not forget, please do not forget that the damage that Liz Truss did was never recovered. People think, oh, well, the pound recovered. Yeah, that's not the damage that it did. The damage it did was to people's pension funds. That damage is still there. It didn't go away, and it never will. If Farage implements his policies in order to make himself a fortune, the damage it causes others will be insane and permanent. And the I told you so banner needed would be so large as to be an almost impossible feat of engineering to accomplish. So best avoid the whole thing. Keep reminding people what Liz Truss did, that Farage is promising to do the same, but on a grander scale. And also don't forget, Liz Truss is now a Reform UK advisor. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.